Welcome to all our participants. Good afternoon to our speaker from Australia. Thank you for joining us for this exclusive masterclass for CBSE school leaders on iterating workplace practices post the COVID-19 crisis. My name is Priyanka Vaidyanath and I work for the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Austrade, in India. I will start with some housekeeping information. Today's session will be for a duration of 1 hour and 30 minutes. This session is also being live streamed on CBSE Academic YouTube channel. So if any of you are facing technical issues, request to please visit the link shown on the screen. At the end of the session, we will be taking questions. In order to ask a question, please type your questions in the chat window in the right side of the panel or use the live chat session if you're attending through YouTube channel. Austrade is recording this webinar and will be sharing the recorded version after the session. Please note that the audio quality may fluctuate during the webinar. In case you have audio related issues, please check your headset and audio settings, and if the issue still persists, please disconnect and connect back again. In case of any network disruptions, please stay online. We will connect back in a few minutes. The Australian government has been taking initiatives to support the sector during this challenging start to 2020. One, we have launched Australia Virtual Masterclass Series, partnering with some of the leading Australian universities to introduce you to Australia's quality education and enable you to smoothly transition to online teaching. The Professional Development Series for school leaders started last week and will continue until the end of June, and all locations are welcome to join. We believe it's a great campaign which can unite the education community during this difficult time. A big thank you to Dr. Biswajit Saha and the Central Board of Secondary Education for extending support to our program. If you would like a deeper experience of Australian education during lockdown, you can discover the wealth of educational expertise Australia has to offer by searching for the Study Australian collection on the FutureLearn platform. And 3, Austrade will also be launching the 2020 edition of the schools video competition soon. We will keep you posted on the dates and details of the competition. In this competition, we have had the brightest and talented students showcase their knowledge across various topics where they create videos and upload the same on YouTube. The winners have traveled to Australia in the past, and this year we'll be back with more excitement. I would now like to introduce our academic, Dr. Sharna Wiblen. Dr. Sharna Wiblen is a lecturer in management at the Sydney Business School, University of Wollongong, working at the intersection of talent management, information technologies, and HR analytics. Her research critically analyzes how the concept of talent is defined in organizations, as well as the structure and desired outcomes of talent management policies and practices, including talent acquisition, talent identification, and talent development. Sharna is passionate about teaching and the processes of learning and treasures the opportunity of positively influencing and experiences all of her students. Over to you, Dr. Sharna.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And yes, please let me reiterate that it is my absolute pleasure to be sharing this moment with you today as I'm sharing my screen. To be able to be talking to you and sharing some of those insights to do with talent management and technology and how we might go about managing our workforces currently. And by workforces, we are talking about the educational context, both now and how we are going to do this moving forward. So it is my absolute pleasure to share the next hour and a half with you and be able to share my insights and really facilitate a conversation to think about where are we now and what do we want to do and where do we want to go in our journey together as the team of humans and humanities. Now, as already said, I am Dr. Sharna Wiblen. So I am a lecturer at the Sydney Business School, the University of Wollongong, and we will be talking about our workplaces and practices. Now, I do know that this is your final presentation in this series. Lucky for me to be the final number 6 in the presentation series. But in part of the conversation before we start, I want to share with you a little bit about that exceptional Australian education. So today I am representing the University of Wollongong. I am a lecturer there and I've been there for almost 4 years. And here are a little bit of oversight, some facts, some figures about the University of Wollongong. So one of the things that we are super proud of is that we're a really quite a young university. We are 50 years old within the context of our operations, and we just recently made it into the top 200 of universities and institutions worldwide, which was fantastic. The other thing I want to share with you today about my institution and the University of Wollongong before we start thinking about and reflecting and pausing about how we're going to do things moving forward is to share with you that we've actually got campuses all over the world. But within Australia and within New South Wales, within the Sydney sort of area, we've got 3 campuses that I'd like to profile here for you, which international students have the opportunity to study at any of these. And I've had the absolute privilege of teaching at all 3, and I'll share with you in a little few moments some of the photos of me with students at both Southwestern Sydney and in our CBD. So at the top, we've got our traditional campus, which is famously known for its ducks and duck ponds. The middle picture is of a brand new campus that we've only had in the last 4 years, and that is in the growing sort of population area of Liverpool, and we call that Southwestern Sydney. And also our wonderful CBD campus, and it's that bottom photo down there, which is my institution, my campus, the place in which I spend a lot of my time as my work location. And as you can see, it's a terrible place to work in terms of the view. So it's a really nice place to study and teach. As we were talking about and just thinking about the next time, an hour and a half together, what we're really going to be doing is thinking about and pausing. So this is a different time. The idea that I am presenting this to you in my home office is a relatively new concept from my point of view. I would usually be in the city presenting this and thinking about what we're going to do. But regardless of where we are, whether we're in India or the Middle East or here in Sydney, this really gives us an opportunity to think about what's going on. And so I like to be able to get us to use this time to really reflect about who are we, where are we now, what do we want to be doing, and where do we want to be going. So if I could just think of you, one of the things is that for some of us, we see change as this chance for lots of things to do differently, to innovate, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But for others, we've got this uncomfortable notion of what change is, and that the current situation might be considered completely unwelcome. It's like, I had enough on my plate in trying to facilitate impactful student learning, even before COVID-19 and the health crisis that we're facing. Regardless of where our mindset is, regardless of what we think, this really gives us an opportunity for a time to pause. And it is with my privilege to try and facilitate that time, that opportunity to be able to stop and think and reflect and pause, to think about how we as leaders are operating within our educational context towards both our students and also to teachers. Because now is a really good time, and I love this image, to look in the mirror and to think about those people that we are leading, those people that we are managing. Are they on our team and saying, oh my God, not quite sure what she's up to? Or are they on our side going, yay, Sharna, that was awesome, and you so deserve a round of applause? Before we think about how to iterate post-COVID-19, because that's really what we're going to start talking about, how do we transition through this context and through this health and educational and economic crisis, knowing that it is going on, I want to share with you a little bit more about me before I start talking about my insights. Because the way in which I view and frame the content that I'm about to deliver is really about my understanding and has inside of it, embedded with it, so many assumptions about my view of the world that I'd really like to share with you to help contextualize the conversations which follow. So firstly, in the introduction, it was talking about what I study. So I am a management consultant turned academic. I started in business and transitioned into academia. And I self-describe myself as what we call a pracademic. So I'm an academic that is only really interested in making sure I can generate knowledge and insights which can be useful. And hopefully this is a forum where I am able to do that and provide you with some research-based insights which you can find useful. As we talked about in front of our introduction, I am interested in the intersection between talent management, information technology, analytics, but fundamentally I'm interested in business. So my speciality and my focus is about how do we structure, how do we organize workforces, which in your context can absolutely mean a team of teachers within your school environment as principals and school leaders. And how do we mobilize and structure their work in order to help us execute our strategy? So I always joke, depending on the context, of some days I make an exceptional business person and a terrible academic, and other days I make a terrible theoretical academic but a great business person, because that intersection between business and academia for me is really about who I am. I am also interested in technology. So I know from my readership that I actually get a lot of reads about my work to do with human resource information systems. So if any of you are fascinated with that, you can find me. I write about that as well. If you don't know what I'm talking about, absolutely, let's click through. The other thing that's really useful to help contextualize the sort of positivity that's going to come with the sentiments of what we're talking about today is that I have a whole pile of rules and guidance statements that kind of shape my ideas, my values, and how I allocate my time and attention. But this thing is the screensaver on my phone and has been for 3 years, and it's really useful within the current context, but it was part of me doing that before COVID-19, is that I really do try and focus on the everyday rather than the someday. How do I make today's day better? How do I improve the world today? How do I facilitate a conversation that might make somebody else's day more useful? What can we do today that is no less important than what it would be someday? That's Bora Bora, by the way. It feels like a lifetime ago. The other thing, because we're going to be talking about what can we do to iterate, and to iterate means it assumes that we're going to improve the processes today when talking about COVID-19, is that I have a mindset that thinks that the world is full of possibilities. So when I approach a conversation or a problem or a challenge, I will feel very uncomfortable, much like all of us will when we feel that there are elements of our lives and our security that are disjointed, and we will talk about that as a team in a couple of slides. But I really have that idea that things are full of possibilities, and I love the idea of experimenting. So that innovation, that creativity, the idea of we've got a challenge, we've got an external shock in COVID-19. How can we actually frame this as a possibility to try something new or try something different? Or, as we're going to talk about today, iterate what we do within our schooling systems. We were introduced before about treasuring the opportunity to be an educator, and I think coming from business and my focusing on the everyday rather than the someday is I really do treasure every single class with all of my students, regardless of where they come from or regardless of what we're talking about in terms of topics. But sharing in somebody's educational journey is a complete privilege. And it's really nice for me to be standing or sitting, sitting in front of you today as such a collective group of exceptional people that all play such a pivotal role in teaching. What other profession do we get to have where we get to create all the other professions? It's an absolute privilege from my point of view. I showed before that we had the Southwestern Sydney in Liverpool. This is just a picture, a bit of an overview of what that particular classroom looked like that I taught. My first year at Wollongong, again, I consider it a privilege to be teaching first years. They're brand new, don't have an idea of transitioning from high school where teachers such as yourself are more supportive into that university context where it's like, you've got 4 hours of my time, let's figure out what we're doing. But it is wonderful to share in higher educational history in Southwestern Sydney. And we can compare that to basically what I do now. So my speciality, the thing that I've really focused on in the last few years, is that I'm an executive educator. So sitting within Sydney Business School with the University of Wollongong, my team that I am part of, we really do focus on the postgraduate aspect of that and teaching out of the Sydney campus as well as the Wollongong campus, but I teach execs. So there is the potential that one of you might end up in my class, but as part of that teaching of execs, I have my own MBA class, so my own Masters of Business Administration class, and I teach responsible talent management strategy. So we spend a whole subject together talking about how we can make more deliberate, intentional, and informed decisions about our people. So the other thing to share about is that when we are talking about workforces, when we are talking about strategy, when we are talking about managing people or teachers and students, we're all talking about the aspect of humanity. So one of the fascinating things about being a management consultant turned academic looking at workforce practices is that I get to study people. Trained as a social scientist, I get to watch how do we do things, what do we do, what do we say, what do we not say, and also the role that individual perceptions play on how we manage our workforces or how we structure them, how we motivate them, how we keep them engaged, how we give them what they need in times of opportunity and also in crisis. And I love playing with particular things just to make people view things slightly separately. And you'll see that I've done us both a favor, particularly with Australia and India. We're on top of the world, team. So just a few flips of a chart, the world as we know it, turn it upside down. We've got a duck on the left-hand side. I always love the image of the duck. And then, of course, Australia is no longer down under. We are definitely on top. So with that, I really wanted to give you an overview of my context, my ideas, my thought processes, because we are going to spend a little bit about thinking about your own understanding. What is it that you see? What is it that you feel? And because what you see and how you feel is going to influence how you act in terms of your leadership, in terms of the ability to bring your groups of teachers together, in terms of how you as teachers and school leaders are going to foster that student learning with some form of continuity post COVID-19. So what we really need to do is think about you, your own understanding, because how you see, how you feel will influence how you act and also the human that you're going to be. So today's session is going to be a little bit interactive. There are a number of you, which is absolutely fantastic to be able to talk with all of you this evening. There's a wonderful team behind the scenes that's helping with the chat functionality. But I'm going to ask you and prompt you to share your ideas and your thoughts in terms of what is it about your own understanding? How are you framing the current context? How do you feel at this moment inside? And if you don't feel comfortable sharing that in the chat functionality, that is no qualm. You can write that on your own piece of paper or think to yourself, how is it that I do? So the first question that I want to pose to us, team, is when you think about COVID-19, how do you feel and what do you see? So if you just think of some words, some statements, some idea, how do you feel? What comes to mind straight away? And what do you see? What is it when you look around? What is it that you see in the context in front of you? I'll just give you all just a couple of minutes to think about that. What is it that you feel and what is it that you see? And one of the things that we need to do as leaders, both in crisis and outside of crisis, is to really think about what is it about me in my role as a principal, in my role as a teacher, in my role as a school leader, in my role as being in the ability to sort of influence those people and those students in front of me. How am I approaching my work every day? How am I feeling about this? And what do I see around me? So the other question that we're really going to think about in terms of specifically COVID-19, and again, binary, very simplistic, zeros and ones for computer programs, I appreciate that and acknowledge that it is way more complicated. But if we were just looking at the spectrum of sort of how might we feel, I want you to take just a minute and go, do I feel curious or do I feel overwhelmed with all the ambiguity? So again, just taking just a moment of what we are doing in COVID-19 to check in with ourselves as leaders and go, how do I think of this? Do I think this? Do I feel curious? I wonder what's going to happen post COVID-19. I wonder what the world's going to look like. Or is it like, I don't know what's going to happen post COVID-19. I don't know what the world is going to look like. And then the second question I want us to take stock of, and just to take the time to reflect on before we move forward and before I give you actionable insights about what we can do or particular takeaways of things that you can do post this webinar to go, okay, what have I learned and what can I do differently? Is, do you see endless challenges or numerous possibilities? So in your role as principal, as school leader, as a teacher, potentially as a parent, as a fellow human being, do you see endless challenges in front of you? Or do you see numerous possibilities? And again, this is a skill that we can use every day, every moment, to just take that small moment to check in and go, what do I see? How do I feel? Because one of the things I have the privilege of studying is how what we think, what we see influences how we act and how we treat people in workplace contexts. So I want to say it's going to be okay as some of the part, but regardless of whether you're curious or encased in ambiguity, I'm going to share with you 3 things that you can say and do as school leaders to pursue student learning with a degree of continuity. Okay, so part of what we're going to be doing in our time together is I'm going to give you a topic or an idea that is really important in my research in which I've seen pre-COVID-19, but has kind of been illuminated as particular things that we might want to address as school leaders and principals and teachers in this process, and take this as an opportunity to think about how we can do things better moving forward. So the first thing we're going to do, team, is to start with your teacher strategy. Now, strategy. One of my favorite words, love it, along with kaleidoscope, but we don't really have the opportunity to talk about kaleidoscope of talent colors today. But strategy for me as a management consultant turned academic, everything starts with strategy. So today, our first thing that we're going to take the time to think about is your teacher strategy. So how do we mobilize our workforce, or in your case as leaders, your teachers, to help you execute your strategy and your school strategy? Now, before we do that, it's really important just to take a time to think about what does strategy. So if I asked you, what does the term strategy mean to you? And again, team, if I could ask you to choose the chat functionality, I've got a fantastic group of people behind the scenes to be able to capture your ideas. But if I say strategy, what do you think? What do you feel? What do you see when you hear the term strategy? Okay, so I can see a little flick up the top. Lots of things associated with planning. So let me unpack just a little bit to do with strategy. Now, in planning for this presentation today, I was trying to think about wonderful ways to make those cross-cultural connections between us, which is fantastic. And I don't think I can go past the opportunity of talking about cricket. So I know that cricket is not everyone's game, but we are Aussies and Indians. So if we're going to have any form of banter, then cricket is a good way to start. So one of the ways I like to teach talent management and workforce strategies in my MBA class is I do actually talk to them about cricket. Some of the students love it, some of it not so much. So again, with everyone here today, some of you will love it. But let's think about in terms of strategy. We are planning, but when we are planning, we need to know what game we're playing. We need to know what competition arena we are competing in, and we need to know the success criteria. And the success criteria also always fascinates me. So let's think of it in terms of cricket. Know what game you're playing. Cricket. Woohoo. Fantastic. But knowing what is your competition arena, there is a very big difference between whether we are playing a test match, a one-day international, or a T20. So although we can say in terms of our strategy, we as educators, we as people that are selling education, fostering learning, all that sort of stuff, we are all playing the same game. And even in a university environment, we share quite similar values in terms of fostering student learning, just a different context. But even though we are playing the game, we need to know what competition arena we are in. So if we are doing primary school, high school, universities, postgrads, MBA, for me, they are very different competition arenas to be in. Competition used loosely in this context. But if we take that to a cricketing analogy, there's a big difference between whether you're playing a one-day international, a test match, or a T20 or in the India Premier League, right? They're all cricket, but they are very different ideas about what it is that we're doing, what is our aiming. And then we really need to think about our success criteria. One of the fascinating things about COVID-19 is that absence of idea of how will we know we did the right thing? How will we know that we saved people's lives? How will we know that X was doing that? And we could say the same thing to do with a cricketing analogy or a school analogy. How will we know that we have executed our strategy? What are those success criteria and how much control do we have over those? So let's think a little bit more about that, because I'm going to give you 3 aspects of your teachers, your school, that you can start working on in the context of this webinar, but also post it to start thinking about how am I going to iterate my workplace practices post COVID-19. And in saying that, post, again, a loosely used word, we can start doing this stuff straight away. So number 1, strategy, strategy, strategy. You must reiterate your talent strategy. So let's again just take a couple of minutes to reflect and think. Are all teachers of equal value? Again, team, I'd like to encourage you to pop your ideas in the chat. You can be binary, so yes or no. Are all teachers of equal value? Yes, 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 no, 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 yes, 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 no, 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 yes, yes, yes. Here again, team, is a really good ways for us to take that time and think, what's my own understanding of all of this? Because we can already see from the chat functionality, and I'm sure it'll be the same in our YouTube, is that we have these very different views about the role of teachers and are they of equal value. So from my research, I study how we attribute value to individuals in the context of organizational based work. But we can take those ideas and transfer them into the teaching context. Do we think that all teachers are of equal value? And you can see from the chat, we don't have a uniformity agreement or disagreement on that. The next question, so let's just think about in terms of our teacher strategy. What role do teachers play in executing our strategy? What makes a specific teacher valuable? So let's assume that teachers are not all of equal value, or even if they are, what is it about a teacher, an individual teacher, that makes them valuable in the context of your school? So I want you, for this question, team, is to adopt that principle lens and go, within the context of my school, within the context of my educational environment, what makes a specific teacher valuable? And again, I'm just watching little tiny things flick up on the top to keep in mind. But I can already see that there is an array of different responses in our chat functionality. And that's always a good environment too, is to see what your colleagues think. Because even though we are all in this team, we are in this together. So you have the opportunity to see what your colleagues think in terms of what makes a specific teacher valuable. Now, one of the things about COVID-19 is that if we take a very critical organizational based workforce strategy lens, so again, very commercial, very corporate, the idea that not all of our employees are created equal, this is a really good time for us to think about. Pre-COVID-19, would you have given the same answer? Pre this current global pandemic and health crisis, would I have communicated the same ideals about what makes a teacher valuable? Because here's our opportunity to start iterating workplace practices post COVID-19, to think about us as a leadership team, us as individuals. Would I have said the same thing before this current context? So we are, from an organizational point of view, totally under the assumption that some teachers are of greater value. Like in organizations, some individuals are of greater value. They should be aligned to our strategy. But the way in which we do that is that inherently all of us as individuals go, if you're more valuable, I'm going to invest in you. If I think that you're more valuable, I am going to gamble on you. I am going to see you. I am going to reward you. I am going to develop you. And in the process of COVID-19, it's giving us that time to pause and reflect, pause, as I will do now, pause and reflect on whether we think the same things are valuable. Are there particular qualities and attributes in our teaching team that we now know as school leaders we should invest in more? Is there something about COVID-19 that's made you go, I thought this wasn't that valuable or really wasn't an important skill or attribute, but COVID-19 has really illuminated. It's really reflected that mirror image to say, actually, this deserves this attribute, this quality, this way of acting and performing, this way of talking with our students, can help us think about what we need to know going forward. So with all of our 3 things that we're going to talk about today, team, and this is our first one in terms of getting you to think about, we need to iterate your teacher strategy. We shouldn't be doing the same thing. We shouldn't be considering all of our teacher things the same way post-COVID-19. Is your action step. Now, again, you're all educators, so you're familiar with the idea of homework and stretch goals. So thinking of that and harnessing that thing that we all value on this call today to think about, okay, here's my action step from Teacher Sharna today. Reflect and then decide where you are going to iterate your talent strategy. So, and your teacher strategy. So where is it? Is there a particular skill? Is it a particular capability? Is it a particular attribute that you as principals and school leaders are going to take the time to go, we didn't think that was valuable then, now it is moving forward. Okay. With that, team, let me introduce you to point number 2. And the second sort of thing that I want to share with you today based on my research and my reflections and ideas about how I'm seeing talent management and workforce strategy in light of COVID-19. So I always like leadership. All of you in your positions on this call today are either current or future leaders, and either that way you are the leaders of your students. It's up to us to instill them, to keep them safe, to inspire them, to teach them something. COVID-19 has been a fantastic opportunity, again, knowing that I think it's full of possibilities, is to look at the notion of leadership and think about what type of leader do we want to be. So one of the things that we do already know from organizational-based research is that we see more of leadership in times of crisis. When we are feeling as individuals, as citizens, as humans, when we feel under attack, when we feel scared, when we feel full of fear, when we are full of ambiguity, we look to others to help us guide us through that particular context or that experience. And COVID-19 is exactly a really good example of that, where we have, myself included, had numerous days and perceptions and ideas of confusion and ambiguity and concerns about security, concerns about health, concerns about job security, concerns about paying bills. So we do then look to leaders in order to think about what can we learn from them, and we also need to see them. So here's just a sample of images just to kind of invoke a bit of reflexivity. But again, I'm going to pose you some questions. What skills and capabilities in a leader do you want to see? So as not yourselves as leaders, but as somebody that looks to leadership in this current times, what are the qualities, the skills, the capabilities, the attributes? You can pick a term if skills and capabilities doesn't work for you, but the idea is to think about, what do you want to see in a leader? What is it that you need to see for them to act, for them to say, for them to show? How do you need them to act in order for you to feel and see that they've acted in a particular way? That's positive. And here, just in case you're not quite sure, we have the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. We have Donald Trump, who is in the US. We have my own Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and of course yours. So just a small selection of, if we took that time to think about consuming the world news at the moment, of how vastly different our leaders have responded to the current context. Now let me give you that extra moment of reflexivity. Sometimes it's really easy for us to go, yeah, absolutely. I know what I want to see a leader do. I want them to make decisions. I want them to be articulate. I want them to be front and center. Now let's think about it. Which type of leader do you want to be? So again, each of you in your roles as school leaders and principals and teacher, you are a leader. I know that when I stand in front of a classroom of whether it's first years or exec students, postgrads, does not matter. They are looking to me as being a leader. So giving that the time, the attention to think, what type of leader do you want to be? Is there a particular person on this screen where you're like, I absolutely want to be like them, and no? Or that's the type of leader that I'd like to see. That's the type of leader that I'd like to be. And then again, team, I just want to encourage you to think about, what is it about that person? What is it about what you have seen them do? What is it about how they've made you feel? What is it about how they have acted that has made you go, they warrant applause? Or are we looking at the mirror and going, they warrant critique or a round of applause? Now, must concede, totally professional crush on Jacinda Ardern. I mentioned that in lots of things in talking about the idea of talent and leadership. How do you get yourself to be a professional crush of somebody else so that they can come work for you? But it is really interesting as a social scientist to take the time to stop and take off my Dr. Sharna hat and put my Sharna Lee hat on and go, actually, how do each of these leaders make me feel in the current context? So team, if we think about that, you already know quite a bit about leadership. You're already in leadership positions and you have been for a while. I'm in no way trying to detract from the absolute credibility of the roles that you do. But we already know from all of the research and the empirical evidence, and this is not going away, that how we as leaders act, how we feel, how we talk really influences how people experience the world, both today and what I say yesterday. So please make sure that your teachers see you. Okay, I think one of the really important things out of COVID-19 from my point of view is it's really interesting and a bit disheartening, I have to concede, when I see leaders in the time of crisis absolutely disappear. They don't show themselves. They go underground. Or worse still, they go missing in action. They go MIA. In terms of crisis, we already know, regardless of whether people see it as full of possibilities or encased in challenges and ambiguity, that we still want to see those leaders. We still look to those leaders, and yourself included. So make sure, I would like to say, make sure that your teachers can see you and see you in however way you can make that happen. And then reflect about what is it about you that you're hoping that they can see. With that team and that element of reflexivity, again, homework. We're going to call it an action step this evening, but it's homework. It's to think about, okay, if I take this idea of leadership and seeing and feeling and acting and how we know what it is that we want to see in leaders and how do we want to be viewed by our team post-COVID-19, then I want you to devise a plan for 3 things. Okay, so after today, 3 things. Devise an action plan. I want you to think about, what type of leader do you want to be? What are some of the actions that you want to be known for? When people see you in your leadership role, what is it that they want to see? So I want you to think about, what are 3 things that you can start doing which align with the ways that you want to be seen? And think about leaders that do it with decorum. So think about those people that in the COVID-19, if you're not quite sure where to start, think about leaders, any type of leaders. Doesn't have to be world leaders. It can be any type of leader or leadership, formal or informal positions, to say, actually, I've really admired what they've been doing throughout this crisis, and take the time to think about, what is it about what they've done that's made me feel better, that's made me see things full of possibility, or that's made me act a little bit differently. And think about those 3 things that you can do, action words, those things that you can do to help you transition and ensure you are the leader that you want to be. Number 3, team. Wow, okay. Didn't see that coming, I have to say. But what we need to think about is that we had this amazing context now in hindsight, which has been terribly unsettling, where we have had the opportunity to think about the how and where of student learning. So when talking to organizational leaders, I've been having lots of conversations about the where, when, and how of work. And I've been doing that for over a decade. And there's actually a webinar coming out with me in it next week where I've been talking about the where, when, and how of work for well over a decade. So I've had the privilege to work in particular situations or organizations or set myself up with that, where I've done some form of working remotely or working from home for 14 years. So that means coming into the current COVID-19 crisis and being asked to do it from home in the context of here, I'm very, very fortunate in terms of having access to hardware and software. So there's 2 computer screens, there's another computer down here, it's relatively set up. So thinking about that. But we're also had to change not only where we as workers have done our work, but where you as teachers have had to do your teaching. So what we need to do is take this time to think about what is it about the how and where of learning that we want to change or update or iterate before our students start returning. So again, let me just ask you, take a couple of minutes to think. Where do you prefer to foster student learning? Is there anyone in our audience today that's listening to this that's like, I would love the notion of homeschooling, or I love the idea of doing it remotely, or I can't wait to get back in the classroom. Get me in the classroom. I need to be in front of my students. Learning is face-to-face. So think about the where, the location, the physical location. How much of that, given COVID-19, has changed our view about the where of student learning? Classroom, in the classroom, remotely, classroom, classroom, anywhere, classroom. So it's interesting just flicking through some of the comments because again, that image that I showed you at the front was me in the context of the beginning of the year, transitioning from starting my MBA subject in the physical classroom, just like you do, and then having to teach it online, which it did look like this, of teaching my MBA students in remotely and thinking about what aspects of those student learning outcomes, what aspects of my content delivery couldn't be transitioned. So let's think about, because one of the things about COVID-19, if we think about it in terms of opportunity and possibility, there might be more opportunities to think about the where of learning. The other thing I want you to do is to, again, you've got your school principal hat on, you've got your principal, your school leader hat on, or you've got your teacher hat on. What do you want to see change in the approach to teaching? So because of COVID-19, just the current context, what is it that moving forward post-COVID-19 you want to see change in the approach to teaching? Okay. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your ideas in the chat functionality with everyone. So there's so many great ideas there already in just flicking through about what do we want to see change. So again, if we take that reframe of total ambiguity to a world of possibility, what does this current context give us and post-COVID-19 that we have the opportunity to change? One thing I want to say there, and there is a caveat, there is an asterisk, terms and conditions apply. It's really important that we don't overreach. So just because we've had this current context, it was all reactionary. It is a health crisis first and foremost, and still is, that we don't think about we can do that because. So thinking about what is it that we want to change and why. So from my point of view as an educator, I think it's fantastic when people are like, oh, because of COVID-19 and we have more remote learning, we can now get other people to call into our classes. And I sit there and go, I've been doing that for years. I've already had lots of people come in and talk to my classes. COVID-19 is great because I can get other people that don't need to travel to Wollongong, but that might really be the way in which to get us to think about student learning. What is it that we can use this as an opportunity to change? And again, team, here's our action step. So if we take that time to iterate our workplace practices post COVID-19, there are 3 areas that we want to look at. We've got to think about our talent strategy. We've got to think about the type of leaders that we want to be and how we can start being those leaders if we haven't been doing so intentionally beforehand. And my third action step for us, team, is to identify 3 things regarding the past way of teaching which are now out of date or require an update. So just like I want you to channel your mobile phone provider, the idea of the software provider or your computer provider, or even WebEx, they're currently updating their stuff now. So what is it that we want to put as school leaders and as principals and teachers? What is it that we want to put in the next version of teaching? If we're going to upgrade and install a new version of teaching post COVID-19, what are 3 things that we want to put in that update? What are 3 things that we might be able to call upon ourselves and our teaching team to think about? What do we consider, okay, well, we didn't really realize that was a bit out of date, or what is it that we want to iterate and update moving forward? With that, we're coming very closely to the Q&A, and I know there's lots of people here, and I've hopefully given you some things to think about, but there's 2 more things from me before we open the Q&A. So bigger theme of all the stuff we've been talking about today is me using sort of the Snow White analogy of taking the time to think about what's in the mirror and think about taking that time to pause. So we've got to look in the mirror, all of us as leaders and humans, to think about how are we feeling, how are we seeing, and more importantly, how are we acting? And if we looked at ourselves with some reflexivity, do we reckon that we'd warrant some critique? Bit concerned about that one. Or is our team of teachers and our school and school leadership just giving us a standing ovation and clapping with applause? But regardless, okay, regardless of whether you take away from this presentation today to go, I might be a bit more on the critique side than I'd like, or there's ways that I can fundamentally get to the applause side, is to think about how we each feel, how we each see. Because how we feel and how we see and your own understanding will influence how we act. And regardless of whether we're encased in ambiguity or we think the world is full of possibility, we're all being asked at this current COVID-19 time to act with elements of humanity. My second thing and last thing that I want to share from you is that I know and I understand the pivotal role that teachers play in shaping who our kids will be. So I myself, I have 3 little cherubs, they're not home, so I can call them cherubs, 3 little kidlets. And one of the things about COVID-19 that I've learned is that I am not a great homeschool parent. Not at all. I might be able to teach in university context, but trying to teach narratives and adverbs for my primary school children, not great at. But I already knew that before COVID-19. I already knew and appreciated with undue gratitude the role that all of my kids' teachers play in shaping who they can be. Because that role of being a teacher, a leader, or having access to students and forming them, it is an absolute privilege. And I like to approach all of my teaching, even in a university environment. It's not what you have to say, but it's what your students take away. And again, a kid will always remember how you make them feel. And I want to, in closing, send you all a virtual hug. So as a teacher to teacher, as a parent to parent, as a human to human, regardless of where we are currently located, I want to extend a huge thank you, because what you have been asked to do in the current context of trying to facilitate student learning in this context and health crisis, you all deserve a physical social distancing, of course, but virtual hug. Because from me to you, I'm incredibly grateful for all that you have done. One of the things to do with this is that some of my presentation tonight is associated with an opinion piece that I wrote for the University of Wollongong. You can access that by Googling my name, and then it's on my site, but also at the University of Wollongong. And if you'd like to type your questions in the chat box, we will be able to have some form of Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Sharna, for such a fantastic masterclass. Your session was very engaging, both through WebEx and live chat. So not just educators, I guess it's relevant for all of us, and we have received so many positive comments during your session. Especially they're saying, it's an excellent presentation and all that. So we'll now welcome questions from the audience. And in order to ask a question, you simply type your question in the chat window on the right side of the panel or put a comment under your YouTube live video. I've in fact received a lot of questions. So here's your first one. Let's try and cover as many as possible.
Yep.
So how do we make students comfortable after this crisis in school premises? Is the first one.
Look, I really want to attempt to be, and in preparing for today's presentation, I want to try and be quite sensitive because I do have this mindset of everything is full of possibility, and I do live in Australia and we are currently having a very different context to what you are experiencing here today. But I think when your students return to the classroom, and your teachers too, so I always like to tell my kids, just because you become an adult doesn't mean you're less scared. Just because you go from being a kid in a classroom to an adult in the world doesn't mean that you don't need that sort of virtual group hug. So I think the thing we need to, I would suggest as an action plan, is to just focus on that feeling of security. When all of us come back into the classroom and the workplace, so your teachers as well, not just your students, when we come back, it's different. It's new. The mirror looks different. The context is different. Humanity is different. The world is different. And we need to get in and acknowledge that just all your little students are going to feel differently when they get there. They're going to see COVID-19 differently. They're going to see school differently. They're going to see learning differently. And so many other contextual factors are going on in the background that's really going to do that. So I would say in terms of learning too, yes, we want them to learn, but we probably need to spend that time just letting them come back in and going, I see you, I care for you. That was super scary, hey team. So let's figure out how we do that. And again, I would like to reiterate that adults feel the same way too, right? It's coming back into the school environment can feel super scary as well, not just for the students, but like, how am I meant to keep all these little children inspired and learning and all that sort of stuff when they've just witnessed probably something that they should not have, well, that has taught us a lot, but it might take us a while before we view it as a learning opportunity and rather than a, oh my God, oh my gosh,
That was a good one. So moving on to the next question, since there's a lot of exposure to technology, how do you maintain a balance between online teaching and exposure of students towards technology?
Yeah, look, I think that that's a great question and a challenge we've had for a while. So I have different viewpoints as a parent and as a teacher myself. So I do have that sort of cognitive dissonance. When I asked, where do you think that student learning should happen? I know that I'm on Team Classroom. Regardless of the tech, I'm on Team Classroom. I also know, regardless of the tech, my MBA students get a book and a pen when they walk into my MBA classroom, and I make them write in a book and a pen. And Kiara is sometimes, the UAW team member, is really good in helping facilitate that. And that's because we know as teachers that students learn, it turns on a different part of our brain. So I think that part of pre-COVID-19, post-COVID-19, when we talk about adult teaching strategies and kids and how we learn and how we need scaffolding and double loop learning and all that sort of stuff, I don't think that that would change. I think the challenge will be that even when we're allowed to have kids back in the classroom, they probably won't come back at the same rate. So then how do you try and stop making kids get left behind? And again, if we take my opinion, sample size of one, that everyone's going to need that kind of group hug security at the beginning of transition, then we probably want to be doing that in the classroom. But yeah, the blending learning is really interesting. I think the results are out. I joke, but I mean it seriously. I just do it with laughter that 2020 is kind of the year that no student learning happened. So our calendar year is, my kids literally just got their report card yesterday. Two of the three just got their report card, and it basically said they're still alive. Like there was nothing useful on it because the teachers didn't know how they were going. They were doing exercises at home, but the teacher was still trying to figure out, how do I take the classroom stuff and put it online? For some teachers like me, it's like, easy done, no probs, WebEx, Zoom, Skype, chat, let's go, polls. And for other teachers, they're like, yo, what? WebEx, Zoom, what? Or how do I transition from that to that? So I think that that's a really good part of us in our teacher strategy, that point number one, to think about not just the blended learning, but also how do we invest in ensuring that our teachers are really equipped to do this in a way that aligns with their teaching pedagogy as well.
Great. Since you were talking about teacher and student, I got a question while you were talking, saying post-COVID, there'll be a natural distance between teacher, student, and students and students. How do we ensure that this one doesn't become an emotional distance?
Yeah, again, I think that that's a really good question. I think in the benefit of hindsight, calling it social distancing didn't help. I think if I also study language use and how language makes us feel. So I'm from my social scientist point of view, I'm like, if we called it physical distancing from the start, maybe we wouldn't have had that association of emotional distance. But when this happened, we were all kind of told reactionary and very fearful, stay away from each other. And that's just not possible in most of the contexts that you're experiencing. So that whole idea of just stay away from each other was not real, and social distance, like it just wasn't very, wasn't necessarily the most effective communication message that we could have. And I don't think we know what it's going to look like. So again, in a university environment, I'm being asked to teach online all year, and I'm the one campaigning saying, can't I come into the classroom? And I'll try and do the physical distancing and try and do all of that. And again, we're talking about leadership, right? So do you want to be the leader that just figures out that that's what you want to do, and it's a new challenge, which means there's new possibilities? Or as a leader, do you go, I don't know how I'm going to bring all my kids back into the classroom with all that distancing, and it's just overwhelming? So again, I'd kind of take that question and just ask you all to take that moment of reflective. Are you like, well, this is an experiment, let's give it a go? Or am I like, this is just going to be way too hard? And check yourself, because how you are thinking and feeling about that question at this moment in time is going to influence what you do going forward. And that's kind of the idea of today's presentation, is to go taking time as leaders to go, how do I feel? What do I see? How do I want to act? How do I, and that interrelationship, because we know our little kidlets can pick up on that too. So if the parents come back to school and the teachers come back to school and they're like, like our kids are going to pick up, like your kids are going to pick up on that straight away. I can't imagine that they're vastly different from my little kids that take so much energy and idea from their parents and their schools that they can kind of pick up and sense when things aren't quite right. So how do we as adults, again, make sure that we're okay when we're in that context to then support our students and what they need in that physical space?
Great. So as we speak, we just, having a lot of questions that are being posted. I'm trying to be a little bit more
That's
quicker.
right.
That shows how interesting your presentation was. So moving on to the next one, what strategy should we follow post COVID-19 when schools will open again? Where does the physical infrastructure of education stand post COVID?
Yeah, great question. So thank you everyone for the exceptional questions. It's really good for, again, me to kind of pause and take the time to reflect about what's shaping my opinions as I'm sharing these as either Dr. Sharna or just a fellow human being. It's hard to go past technology, but I think technology is easy. So when we think about needing to invest in infrastructure, I think the easiest one is to say we need more computers, or we need this, or we need that, or we need better internet connection. I think that's easy. But as teachers and school leaders and principals, we don't always have control over that. So even like the quality of the internet or the accessibility, even if we give them those devices or the access to that hardware, we don't always have control over what that is. That's kind of more of a government, societal based issue. So I think without having the answers, and it's for me to give you the framework or think about how you can think about this, is to go, what can we control? So what is it that within the context of our school, our teacher group, necessarily not without money, but what is it that we can do to enhance the quality of our students' lives? And I think that's where we need to start. How do we enhance the quality of their lives? And if we enhance the quality of their lives in terms of investment, then we'll get to enhance their learning. But I think we need to recalibrate as humanity before we get to the learning part. And then that could be part again of your strategy of going, what are 3 things that we can update, or what are 3 things that we can get rid of? So the other thing that I'd like to encourage all of you on this call today is when you are thinking about where to invest and where to invest in what to do next without the answers, is what is it that you might want to take away? How do you actually take something out of your school day, or take something out of what you ask your teachers to do, which because of COVID-19 you realized it didn't really matter? And that might be another way that you help develop your schools and iterate your workplace practices post COVID-19. What is it that we can take out as much as what we can put in?
Great. So I'm combining 2 questions here. From social distancing to global closeness, what steps should the teachers take to bridge virtual gaps and real human bonding? And the sub-question is education going to be mostly an individualistic affair and ignore the social aspect post-COVID?
Yeah, okay. So again, keep bringing the great questions. They're fascinating. So I have to concede, I teach adults. So as a university lecturer, I do adult-based learning, not high school or primary school-based learning. So there are slightly different teaching pedagogies. So take whatever I say and dismiss it if it doesn't apply within the high school context. But I think the first part of what do teachers need to do, I think that's why I gave you all a virtual hug. Like, that's why I ended the presentation with the whole virtual hug. And I think one of the interesting things that I'm having with my 3 children, who are 8, 6, and 4, so they're little, is all that they've heard through the news from their point of view. Their cognitive ability is that they can get sick, and if they get sick, they can kill their grandparents, right? That's all that they can kind of cognitively compute as my children, is that when you ask them about COVID-19, it's like, can't go near grandma, granddad, we might kill them. Like, it's a really thing. So I think the interesting conversations my husband and I have been having, and again, not in the classroom because I haven't got to be back in the classroom with my students either, which I'm longing for, is to say, actually, even as an adult, this has been really scary. Like, even as an adult, I'm quite confused about what's going on. I don't have the answers. And as a workforce strategy researcher, scholar, used to be a consultant, my job was to provide the solutions. Much like this forum, it's been my job for so long to give the answers. But in this current context of COVID-19, we are all learning at the same time, in real time, in reactionary. And I do lots of stuff to do with scenario planning. And there's no way that we ever scenario planned that the whole world would geographically shut down at the same time.
Great. So in fact, I have a very nice question here. COVID is making people humble or cruel. What do you think about it, and how education plays an important role in this kind of a situation?
Yeah, so look, that's a great question again, and it kind of goes back to the first point that I was trying to make with all of us on this call and this webinar today, is that one of my privileges in being an academic and executive educator is I get to ask all of my students and everyone that I interview, what do you think? Why do you think that? What's shaped your opinion of that? How does that make you feel? Obviously in a research environment, and I'm talking about how we attribute value to people in the world of work. And that's why I like to start these forums and webinars, particularly in the current context, is to say your own understanding of this. So if we're saying that people are crazy or have been great with humanity, take that time to reflect. Which side are you on? Like, are you the person that people are like, or actually I'm probably on the warrant critique team, or am I warrant applause and everyone's clapping me? So again, when we pose these questions to me, which are great, please keep doing it, is to take that time and reflect and go, how would people describe me in this current time? Because if we don't take the time to reflect on how we think and feel, then we don't take the time to think about how we want to act with decorum, which was the second thing about what's the type of leader you want to be. And that action step is start thinking about 3 things of ways that you can act. Because sometimes those people that are full of possibility don't know and yay, and the people that are like on team, oh my gosh, don't know that either, right? It's that element of interpretation and reflexivity. So again, I thought it was really important in our conversations today with my UOW team to say, in setting up the presentation for tonight, I want to acknowledge all those factors and context and variables that really shape me and how I come at our hour and a half together, because it really does frame how I'm talking to you, the words that I use, the language that I use, my ideas that it's full of opportunity and positivity. But it's also a time where I'm absolutely encased in ambiguity as well. But I think it's that time to reflect, team, when we pose these questions. I don't have the answers, but flick them back and go, oh, which one am I? And what would other people say about me?
But I think you're doing a great job. So, reflecting on the positivity, what's the possible positive effects on children after the COVID crisis?
My kids have realized I'm a really crappy teacher, and so they don't understand how I'm now teaching people in India, but that's a whole other conversation for another day. Your kids are always your biggest skeptics. That's a I think that great question. Here we go. I think our students might realize that adults don't have all the answers. And I don't know if that'll be a good thing or a bad thing. But I think one of the things that COVID-19 is highlighting is that none of us had the answers. So even when I asked you to reflect on those 4 leaders and the leadership that we are seeing, nobody knew what to do, right? We didn't know whether to close down a country, to close borders, to give people 4 hours notice to go home, and like we just didn't know. And I think we can be critical and we can clap or we can critique with the benefit of hindsight. But I think maybe one of the things that kind of concerns me as a parent is that they might just realize that adults don't know everything. And the idea is like, somehow as teachers, even in high school, and I know in a university environment, if a student asks you about something, then they inherently think that you know more than they do and have all the answers. And I think COVID-19 potentially still ongoing is that we don't know the answer. We don't have the answers. Our leaders don't necessarily know the answers to our questions either. So I'm sure as each of you as school principals and school leaders, you're asking your leaders above you about what you're going to do and how this is all going to work and what we're going to do moving forward post COVID-19, and they probably don't know either.
All right, so maybe moving on to the next one. There is a lot of fear that's been developed, in the kids nowadays and the current youth. So how do we deal with that particular fear?
How the fear? Yeah, I think superficially, and again, I don't know if it's very useful, but I think acknowledging it is really all we can do to start with as teachers and leaders. So I know even with teaching adults, transitioning from face-to-face to online in a reactive way within a week. I'm also teaching adults who have their own children, but I think one of the things that I have done very differently as in my teacher capacity with my students this year is I've shown them a lot more of me, a lot more of Sharna Lee rather than Dr. Sharna. I'm not sure I'm hugely comfortable about that, but the remote learning, the context, everyone at home, sort of bringing everybody back into the home has meant that a lot more things are on display. So I think step 1 is probably acknowledging the fear and that it's okay to fear that way, like that is an appropriate response. And I think that's all we can really do. I think once we start acknowledging that it's fearful and it's no less fearful in the school environment, I think then we go to stage 2. So if we're thinking about how we are going to set up workplace practices post COVID-19, these are step-by-step things. Like I usually argue totally against anything that's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, because the world is way more complicated than that. But I think we go back to basics. I think we go back to let's get our kids into the room, let's get them in the classroom, tell them that we see them, we miss them, they care for them, and that we've, colloquially in Australia, we've got your back, but I'm on your team, go team. And then I think maybe once people feel a little bit, our students feel a little bit less scared, then we can kind of, again, stop, pause, reflect. What can we do now to enhance the quality of their life or to enhance their student learning experience? But I wouldn't be expecting any of that fear not to be there. And so I think acknowledging that is probably more useful than pretending everything is okay and we're just going back to normal.
Great. So there's another question that focuses on teachers here. So few teachers are very intelligent, but they're not comfortable with new technology. Any suggestions on training them?
Yeah, so let's remember that we didn't set them up for success. So this was an environment, this is not a case of digital transformation. This is not a case of instigating strategically blended learning, whether in a school context or a university context. So I think it's really important, firstly, to acknowledge that. This wasn't part of the strategy. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't part of our success criteria or part of our teacher strategy that we were going to ask everyone to teach through some form of technological capability. So firstly, let's cut everyone some slack. Because this wasn't deliberate, intentional, informed. It was completely reactionary. Second thing I want to highlight in that conversation and that question is that we can't separate how we are teaching to what's going on in the world around us. So just because there's an emphasis to take our teaching home and do it through the tech, and not all of us might be comfortable with the tech, it wasn't just that we all went home and started doing remote learning. Like, we've got houses full of human beings that we're not used to having in the house. We have family members that might be missing or we can't get in contact. We have other people in our family that are sick or worse. And so we weren't just, as school leaders and principals, we weren't just being asked to ask our teachers to learn a new skill. We were asking them to be some form of reactionary human being. And so as we move forward to give them the training, I think that's where we start talking about what parts of this blended teaching or online teaching are we going to keep. Because if your teacher strategy and your update means you're going to bring everything back in the classroom, then you turn to those teachers and you say, I understand that we put a lot of pressure on you in this context and we didn't set you up for success. We didn't train you beforehand. We didn't give you a chance to learn and iterate and practice. We just said, do it. And we thank you for the service that you gave us during that time and a time that we needed it. And say thank you.
Great. So I think there's a broader question, which I think institutions across the world are facing. So the big challenge in the present scenario is financial crisis. And how can we prevent our education system from financial crisis?
Yeah, don't have the answer, team. So there's one of the things that the opinion piece is based on is saying that COVID-19 is highlighting workplace flaws. And so if we talk about workplace flaws in terms of revenues and commerciability and sort of that operational revenues that we need as this grow, I don't have the answers of that. As a social scientist, I get to look at it very curiously from that point of view because I'm not an economist, I'm not a finance person, so I can tap in and tap out and know that that's outside of my my expertise. But if you have access to an economics academic or someone in government, I'd be asking them how are we going to do this differently, and is this part of our workplace strategy that we need to update, that we do need to figure out how we ensure that our schools remain viable, whatever viable means within the context of your success criteria and part of your strategy. Because schooling is such, from my point of view, I'm a huge advocate of everything that all of you do in terms of teaching and schooling and formal education. I'm a huge advocate and spend a lot of my time advocating for any form of higher education and tertiary education, regardless of what institution people study it through, because asking better questions and then hopefully getting some answers is something that I get the privilege of being able to do every day as part of my job, and I love it. So yeah, ask her, not my hat.
That's a good one. So this is a very interesting question that I got now. how to correlate and bring harmony with the three things, namely see, feel, and act?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and thank you for being open to the idea of kind of using that as a framework for our presentation today. So that it doesn't go feel, see, act. It doesn't go act, see, feel. It's not, again, a linear relationship. It's not one, step two, step three. The first thing I would encourage all of you to do is just take time to pause and stop. So if this is a new skill, if this is a different idea, if this is something that you're putting in your teacher strategy update as part of COVID-19 to provide your teachers with a framework to pause and reflect, to take note of how they feel, they see, and how that might be influencing how they act, then this is it's an iterative process. It's a learned skill, and all of us are educators, so we know that we need to learn something, consume it, practice it, get feedback on it, reflect on it, and then give it another go, right, in terms of double looped learning and scaffolding that. So without getting harmony, that is for the individual themselves. And again, I want to concede everyone that this is not a normal presentation that I would have had 2 years ago telling you to go do this, go do that, go do this. All of those suggestions that I've given you today are in the context of a much greater health crisis going on in the background. And it's okay if you feel scared. It's okay if you feel full of ambiguity. Our brains are programmed to say, I'm under attack, or I am not feeling secure, and that's the way our brains work. So I think the best thing that we can do for our teachers in harmony is to say, if you feel fearful, if you feel overwhelmed, don't critique yourself for that. Give yourself a round of applause internally for saying, wow, okay, I'm now aware of how I feel in this moment, and now that I'm aware of that, I can now potentially take a deep breath and then act slightly differently. But again, if you can get to that point to just take the time, then I think you all deserve a round of applause.
Great. I've been receiving a lot of questions. I'm sorry if I'm not able to address all of them, but I'm trying my best. So in fact, related to what you were just saying, post-COVID, unemployment is soaring, and what skill should we enhance to sustain in our jobs is one of the questions.
Yeah, great question. So that's part of my normal research, is what skills and capabilities are valuable in organizations. And you already are skillful and valuable as teachers. And I think that's because inherently, and I am speaking in a collective group, but to be a teacher, you have an inherent desire to know more. You have an inherent desire to do more. You have an inherent desire to be more, because without knowing more, without doing more, without learning more, you can't be that teacher that you want to be for your students every single day. So I would say lots of XYZ things that you can probably do, but I think that meta skill of being curious, of wanting to learn more, of wanting to be more, of wanting to help more within an educational environment, again, I would take this opportunity to thank you all, because being a teacher, regardless of whether it's crisis or not, you have a set of skills and capabilities that are completely valuable. And if teaching is not for you post COVID-19, then as somebody that understands or studies how people get jobs, I would say emphasize that whole ability to learn, the ability to question, the ability to want to be more, the ability to iterate, and the underlying desire to do so, because that still puts you instead of a lot of our human colleagues that aren't framing things in terms of what is possible and what is probable. But either way, let's give it a go and figure it out.
Great. Now, going back to schools and in terms of priority, when the schools reopen, is there any particular age group that needs to be given priority for attending school or classes?
I'm not sure if there's any particular agreement on India's side. I know that I can talk from Australia. Our year 12s, kindergartens and year 1s in New South Wales went back first. I would think and again, this is uninformed opinion and complete conjecture on a sample size of 1 being a parent. My 6-year-old needed way more help than my 8-year-old. And of course, you're in high school, and I can appreciate that. But if you take that same lens, is that my 8-year-old could follow directions. He could understand what a question was asking him to do. He had some comprehension and understanding of what the teachers were asking them to do. Whereas my 6-year-old, she was asked to create a narrative with adjectives and no one knew what we were doing. So if you take my personal story and apply it to your context or your school context or your student cohort, how can you take that learning lesson of my personal story and think about that question in your context rather than attempt to give me the answer of what of these student groups would we have had at home that wouldn't have been able to thrive, that probably had to survive? Because again, yeah, I know that my 8-year-old was happy to thrive with contention, but my 6-year-old, like, we were just surviving like homeschooling because she didn't have enough of that cognition and understanding and framework to build on to get that double loop learning, to get the feedback, to be able to reiterate. So again, no right or wrong answer, and it's not my job to do that. But if that personal story of mine can help you think about the answer to that in your school context, in your classroom context, then think about which one of these sets of students might need just a little bit more and why.
So this one is a very interesting question. So do you think that it took the educator community of COVID-19 to change themselves and their perception on teaching and learning?
Yes. Yes, I do. As a new generation, I wouldn't call myself young, but I know a lot of my colleagues consider me sort of the next generation. A lot of the stuff that they are now considering as appropriate ways of teaching are parts of our ways of doing, and have been for a while. So I think absolutely there will be people that will look at it with a lot more. When I opened the presentation, I said, for some of this is full of possibilities. For others, this change is completely unwelcome. So there will absolutely be teachers where the current COVID-19 has just been like, you want me to update what? I've been teaching for 40 years this way and it's been effective the entire time. And put your own dialogue on that, team. As you listen to that story, you've probably encountered one of your teachers that's like, I know what I'm doing. I've been doing it longer than you've been alive. And any sort of comment and sentiment to that effect just makes me shiver. Because I'm like, we've learnt a lot in education. Our student cohort has changed. The context of learning and education has changed. And so we as teachers need to adapt and change too. Without an emphasis, obviously with an emphasis on what it is that we want to teach our students and what is it that they need to take away. But yeah, absolutely, there'd be some teachers in Australia and India and any other country that would be like, oh, whoopsie, I haven't updated my teaching materials in a decade. And that's not a good practice, even pre-COVID-19. So I think that's an important part of these discussions and these questions is to say, if that's how they were teaching pre-COVID-19, I'm not sure that maybe that warrants some critique even before the current context. All it's done is kind of illuminate things that weren't done very well before.
Great. So can you suggest how to measure self-regulated learning?
Don't know, wouldn't feel comfortable commenting on that. So self-regulated learning is not my expertise. So there's probably those of you in the audience or listening to the webinar that will have other people in your colleague group that are have way more expertise to be able to give you an informed answer on that one.
Okay, so moving on to the next one, what are the suggestions to keep students and parents connected besides online teaching?
Students and parents connected?
Yes.
Do they want to be connected? That's my initial reaction. So I would say question, I'd say for those of you that is a concern about how to keep parents and children connected in schooling, I would say that the best people to ask are the parents and the students. So if that is the notion of success, if the notion of success in the competition, the arena that you're in, again, if we just take some of the stuff that we're talking about in our presentation and take that skill set or that frame and that lens and say, what matters to the parents and the students? What is it that they would want to see? For me to be a leader where my teachers and students and parents feel connected, what is it that they would want to see? How is it that they would want to feel? And then what is it that I, as the school leader, can do to start actioning that so that it aligns, so we can act in that way that makes them connected? So yeah, I'd say students and parents would be the best people to ask about what matters to you. And I think that again comes back to that original thing where I said about strategy, and your teacher strategy. We need to pay more attention to our success criteria. So how do we know that we have connected parents and students in a more meaningful way? How will we know that we have done that and that has been useful in the current context and moving forward?
Great. So this is the last question, which has a sub question, which is very interesting. So as leaders, what would you suggest for us to feel good and motivated during this testing time? And here is the sub question. What's your key mantra for staying so lively and happy during this crisis? That didn't come from me, that came from the educators.
Okay, so let me start with the second one. Yes, I am like this all the time. So I've always joked, in a classroom, it works great. Be grateful you're not my husband, because he has to put up with all the energy for the 13 years of being married, plus more, and my kids as well. So I think the energy comes from alignment, probably. And that's why it was really important for me to, one, it's nice to know that can be communicated through a camera, that I can gauge your attention and you can feel that warmth, because that is part of my personal perspective of thinking about how do I think, feel, and act. I really do, from a personal mantra side of things, focus on the everyday rather than the someday. So I think every day is a blessing, and you can make it the best. And I want to make the world a better place every day. So that is part of what I aim to do. I also do think it's full of possibility. So again, I think that comes full circle with me telling you all a little bit about me as the starting point of how I come to this topic, and then advice on what teachers and principals can do. I think in the current context, I'd say give yourselves a break. So take the pressure down. We have this famous song, famous recording artist in Australia called John Farnham. And I wrote a LinkedIn blog post on it a couple of weeks ago, which I think resonates and will answer the question really well. But his song's called Take the Pressure Down. And I think before we can remotivate ourselves, we need to give ourselves the opportunity as adults to say, this is scary. This is something we didn't plan for. Nobody necessarily has the answers. There's lots of cognitive dissonance. There's lots of ambiguity. First and foremost, it is a health crisis. Then it's an economic crisis, and then we will get to education. But we can't forget about the motivation of this comes from us acknowledging, I think, that it's a health crisis, and it's going to become an economic crisis. It is a humanity crisis, because all of humanity is kind of being influenced and shaped by this. So I would say Google John Farnham, Take the Pressure Down, and use that as your song and potentially your self-talk to just say, before you motivate yourself and before I give you advice on how to motivate yourself, give yourself a break and say, under the current circumstances, I think I'm doing the best that I can do. And again, as I have said throughout this presentation a couple of times, and I say to my kids, it doesn't become less scary just because you're an adult. It's just that we're more aware of what's going on than they are. But it is absolutely, all of us have every right to feel encased in ambiguity, fearful of what is happening now, fearful of what is happening next. And as humanity, we will figure it out together. So go team.
Thank you so much. So I'll wrap up the session now. I'm sure all of them want to hear more from you, but unfortunately, we don't have enough time. So I'm sure all the participants enjoyed the session. We would like to conclude this masterclass by thanking all the participants for their participation today and such great questions. A big thank you to Dr. Sharna for her time and such a wonderful presentation, I must say. And we will send you a recording of the masterclass in the next few days. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.